it's really fast changing. So the solutions we saw last year, we can't sell anymore because now they want something different. So it's not like you can build up this thing and then you're going to run this for 10 years.
But it does seem that for the most part, these companies are using multiple vendors, multiple language service providers, and have a tendency perhaps to split up their volumes by content type.
It's getting to a point where it's quite impressive for like, $20, $30 a month as a SaaS subscription. And hello to SlatorPod 45. Welcome from Zurich.
Hi from London.
Hey, today we have a very special guest. The CEO of Venga Global, Kåre Lindahl, is going to join us today. I'm really looking forward to our talk with Kåre later on. Hi, Esther, you're back.
I am. I'm back. Yeah. Back to tier two in London.
Back to tier 2 in London. Yeah, so walk us through the tiers. What's good, what's bad?
Well, I don't think anything is good, but we have 1, 2, and 3. 1 is medium risk, 2 is high risk, and 3 is very high risk. So I guess the numbers could technically go 4, 5, 6, etc. But for now, we have 1, 2, and 3, and based on those numbers, we are in varying forms of lockdown.
Yep. Similar here where, well, I guess like in the rest of Europe, many places are going into some form of lockdown. They say they're not in lockdown, and it is not a lockdown. It's just a bunch more restrictions, but schools are still on. They keep basically most of the economy open, but like try to reduce social interactions. Pretty
similar.
Let me go political here and say that I find it a very reasonable approach. But when you go on Twitter, you think those people are out. The government is out of their minds. But when you actually carefully think about it, in my view, it's quite okay. So here's my take on Swiss COVID policy. Again, what people tune into this podcast to listen to. So SlatorCon remote, not affected by coronavirus, and filling up both on the participant side and of course on the agenda side as well. We started when we put the agenda online, we said it was a license panel, but actually we changed this to a medical device Medtech panel now, of course, on the back of our report that we published was it a day ago?
Something like that, yeah. 1
or 2 days ago.
They all run into one.
Huge 40-plus page, very in-depth Medtech report. Let's talk about it after, in a minute. It was, I love it. It's such a deep, very well-researched report. So really looking forward to that panel. And then by the time this goes online, we will have run the SEO webinar for kind of SEO for LSPs, search engine optimization, how to be found on Google, digital marketing, etc. It'll be over 300 people. So that's run by Andrew, who people now know because he was the guest co-host last week. So Andrew's running that together with our partners out of, I think they're based in Boulder, Colorado. So that was a pretty big Zoom webinar. And then we're going to have the India online conference coming up on November 18th. I think you're doing the introduction, right, Esther?
Yes, that is the plan. Yeah, so we're going to be sharing, I think we've spoken about the India survey that we ran a month ago. So it's going to be an opportunity to talk through some of the key insights and hear from other people as well. Yeah,
we have a great panel of experts, obviously from India. We have Sheetal Ram Kumar from White Globe, the CEO, then Sandeep Nolkar, who people know from the podcast, then Sarika Guliani, head of ICT for like a digital economy division of Indian Chamber of Commerce and Industry, and then from the buyer side, the Chief Commercial Officer of Pernod Ricard India. So very nice deep dive there into the Indian language ecosystem. So looking forward to that. That's on, again, November 18th. And then I'll be speaking at the STL Trados online conference next Tuesday. Very interesting. So,
very good.
Yeah, they told me they have like 1,000 plus 2,000 people registered. So, all of the comfort of the my little recording studio / office here. So that's nice. Cool. So I want to share a couple of things first before we talk about the medical device report, and then we have a few more stories from Sweep, from our Sweep service. There's a lot of interesting things going on this week. But first, as we're improving the podcast here, and basically putting more content online, we're probably going to start putting transcripts, etc., online. I'm using a variety of tools together with also on the production side, and then we've come across this tool called Descript, and there's probably a bunch of others out there that are maybe similar in capability. But what's really impressive now is the level of transcription accuracy, because you can, for example, upload this podcast, just the audio and including the video actually, and have it transcribed. And it's really impressive, and you could see, because I think we've played around with this tool like 3 years ago, and it was it was okay, but it kind of didn't really help that much. And now, especially if you have a proper accent like you or like Andrew,
proper accent.
Well, unlike like non-native speakers like myself, it's amazing, the accuracy, and you can at the click of a button you can remove ums and ahs and other such words. So very, very interesting. And they have a feature called overdub, and that was really crazy when I looked at it. It was basically it mimics your voice. So you need to consent, you need to upload your voice, it trains on your voice, and then you can type, and then it kind of rereads it in your voice, right?
Oh, wow, okay.
So you're working off the transcript, and then you can correct certain parts of you can correct the transcript, but it actually corrects the audio as well, or it changes the audio based on your voice. Kind of creepy, but also very interesting.
Yeah. Definitely creepy. I'm not sure. Yeah, not sure how on board I am with that.
Yeah, that's why when I first came across, I'm like, yeah, that's nice, but okay, how are you guys gonna do that? So then, yes, there is a consent, and you have to click probably a bunch of buttons to make sure that they, you sign over your voice to some SaaS tool. Maybe we're not gonna.
But your voice is Your voice is like an identifier, isn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, they use voice technology in sometimes like banking to identify people. So I don't know.
Yeah, but you're not giving
out there on the internet.
Yeah, but they're not like. I mean, there's probably one more step to actually type and then have it converted into something that sounds like your voice. That's quite a big step. So.
Oh yeah, no, yeah. I'm just saying the technology and sort of kind of having that out there in terms of data privacy and security and things. It seems a bit scary.
You're right. Yeah. Good point. Okay. Taken. Well, from my side, I was just kind of.
I do not consent. No.
You do not consent. You could just think about how the next step then would also be, once you want to go multilingual, of course, then you have it, machine translated. So basically, the entire chain there becomes very, very tight. Obviously still not fit for like major productions and professional, what we're going to talk about later, like regulatory things like that. But just kind of on a consumer level, it's getting to a point where it's quite impressive for like, $20, $30 a month as a SaaS subscription. So interesting. And well, let's go into a very different field.
Yes.
Not going to medical device. Medtech. Yes, Medtech translation and localization. So we published this 45-page deep dive report. Gets downloaded quite a lot at the moment. So walk us through this. What are some of the key challenges in medical device translation localization? What are the players? What do the buyers say, etc. Let's delve into that.
Yeah, well, I guess maybe let's first talk a little bit about medical devices versus medical technology. So we have spoken a lot about medical devices, I think, within, on Slator and a lot of our editorial content. I think when we started researching the field, it became apparent that there was a lot happening in the field, and specifically relating to technology. So yes, traditionally you would talk about medical devices and in vitro diagnostics, so those sort of long established things used, in the treatment of patients, etc. But then obviously on the technology side, lots is happening. There's software, there's apps, there's a whole lot of development happening in that space. So we wanted to look at it as a whole. And I think for LSPs in particular, it's good to think about the field as medical technology because of how the field is evolving. So yeah, really interesting space, rapidly growing, rapidly changing, as we said, just because of technology primarily, highly regulated as well. So that kind of combination, I think, presents an interesting dynamic. I'm quite familiar with regulated industries, coming from sort of finance and asset management background as well. But I think that the dynamic of having those physical real world products combined with this really evolving landscape of tech, lots of funding and investment going into the R&D budgets as well, and rapidly growing in Asia, for example. So really interesting space. Challenging, yes, because of the regulated nature, I suppose, of it. And yeah, really, I mean, lots happening, but they're not really happening super quickly on the regulated side. So there's this sort of counterbalance of, well, there's lots of innovation. However, there's also the need for devices and other products to conform to these safety requirements. And so for LSPs, I think there's definitely an opportunity there. We talked about ISO certification previously. So the ISO 13485 is the medical device regulation. And then you have on the other side, the fact that a lot of the customers as well, or the customers are also going to be ISO certified as well. And then within that, the challenge that, for example, use of machine translation hasn't really caught up to potentially the rest of the industry. But there is a willingness, I think, to maybe look at how to integrate machine translation within these kind of workflows as well.
So when we're talking about machine translation, I mean, obviously anything that's in a sense patient or, customer related is probably maybe off limits from a direct only, like a machine translation only point of view. But are there any like high volume content types in this medtech space that you could maybe start trialing out a little bit, like high volume, low criticality type of content type, that you're seeing like in some, IT, like with help menus and things like that? Or
it doesn't really seem like it. I think beyond the sort of web and app translation, which technically, I mean, not even that even is fairly high visibility. Yeah, no, I mean, I think the bulk of it is it's products, it's product labeling, a lot which just needs to be perfect or as accurate as possible. I mean, we spoke to a number of buyers that we interviewed for the report, and they're talking about sort of machine translation, the medical device industry being kind of 3, 4, 5 years behind potentially other industries with regards to machine translation, and needing to look at how it really fits in with regulatory requirements. So it's a risk-based decision, I suppose, because obviously they're saying that any mistranslations can have really harmful consequences on the patient and presumably, potentially fines or what have you for the companies responsible.
Yeah, you're right. Exactly what you're saying. It's risk-based. It's not like, let's translate all of this and get market share, or, we need to have that website in a particular language in order to enter that market. I mean, that's not top of their minds. It's basically, hey, we have the requirement to get that content into that particular language and we can't make mistakes. So, again, efficiency gains are probably not super top of mind. I mean, in any corporate context, of course, you want to get the best price, but quality probably here is very, well, as in many other areas, but here particularly is you wouldn't want them to save on. Yeah,
I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if machine translation is being quite widely used behind the scenes amidst the production workflow, but then always coupled with this, quite heavy post editing.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
And we did get to speak to a number of buyers. Did they have any particular comments that you remember that we have here?
Yeah, well, I mean, with regards to machine translation, that was the one that I was talking about, where they were talking about we need to look at how machine translation fits in with regulatory requirements. I think another key thing, actually, before we move on, is something that came out of the interviews with buyers was this sort of multi-vendor strategy as well. And I mean, we'll see how it all kind of plays out, but it does seem that for the most part these companies are using multiple vendors, multiple language service providers, and have a tendency perhaps to split up their volumes by content type. So you might use one LSP for the marketing, another for product, or what have you. So obviously really good opportunity for sort of small and mid-sized LSPs as well, looking to maybe go in with their particular area of expertise, but within that, LSPs do need to have the right expertise, right, from the sales reps down to project management, and including translators and linguists as well.
Yeah, that's definitely something that if even of the sales side, if you talk to one of these companies and you have no idea about, like, for example, the latest regulations, on the European context, etc., or do you speak the right lingo, you're probably not going to get in there ever. So it's you want to speak the client's language there. And yeah, I mean, some of these companies are super busy. I remember we had this article, Hamilton, the company that does the coronavirus testing kit. So, they do respirators and coronavirus testing kits, again, medical device manufacturing. So Medtech, and they're probably very busy now with the second or third wave of COVID hitting. So
no doubt.
Yeah, I wonder what's gonna happen with the second and third wave for this industry, right? I mean, what are the implications? Because over the summer, we kind of thought, well, we took one blow and now, it's over, or we're going to recover from that. But now the second, if you look at France, Italy, Spain, in UK, in various states of lockdowns, now Germany as well. I wonder, where that's going to lead. Tech continues to steam ahead. So I think companies or services like, what Moravia does, RWS Moravia, or Lionbridge, like the guys that are serving, like the Microsofts and the Googles and Facebooks, are probably going to do fine. But, again, if you're in travel, hospitality, any of these kind of hard-hit verticals, it's going to get existential very, very, very soon. And also for the interpreters. We had Kim on last week. Yes, if you could do remote, but probably not the entire volume is shifted to remote from an interpreter side. So it's, I wonder how they're gonna do over the next 6 months if there's no resolution there. I think the ATC, the British Translation Association, did their I think we spoke a couple of times before, but the October survey. So what were some of the highlights? Does that new second, third wave is it already reflected, or?
Well, I think it's hard to say, because I think here, maybe in London or the UK, unlike other places, for me anyway, it's not really felt like, I mean, you can see it reflected in the numbers as the fact we're having a second wave, but it still feels like the first wave. It kind of feels like things never really opened up. So in terms of sort of from a business perspective, I don't know whether you will have seen throughout the year a decline, a recovery, and then another decline. But in terms of what the ATC found, I mean, like what you were just saying, it's a completely mixed bag. So that was sort of the overall conclusion from the UK ATC October survey. This time, interestingly, they weren't only asking people about the effect of coronavirus, they were also asking people about the likely effect of Brexit. But yeah, on the coronavirus front, they said half of the respondents reported business as usual or business not having been affected at all by the pandemic. So that's one half. And then on the other side, you have the other half who said that they had been affected but are now recovering. So that's potentially the recovery from that first wave, or that they're still being severely affected. So that was that highlights, I think, the fact it is just a super mixed field. Some people, I think about a quarter, said they saw between a 50 and a 90% drop in turnover last month compared to budgets. So it's a smaller proportion, but obviously that's quite a huge drop versus budgets. So
not good.
it's not looking great. And then on Brexit, perhaps less of, or at least now that people have gone through coronavirus, people are potentially less afraid of Brexit, or it seems
It's
like
at
less
least
of a
man-made.
threat.
It's a man-made.
Yeah, it's less of a
disaster.
threat potentially than what we're going through right now. But in that survey, more than half said they expect Brexit to have an impact on business in 2021. But most people said that hiring wouldn't be a challenge. So I suppose that's good. Although they were saying, potentially they'd be looking to reduce headcount in Europe. So UK-based companies potentially hiring more in the UK rather than over in Europe.
Okay. Well, there's still some hiring going on, though. We picked up on a few hiring announcements, not in the UK, but elsewhere. I think you plucked out 3 or 4 that we had in our sweep service this week. Who, where, why, how?
Who, where, why, how? I can maybe answer some of those. So we had, just a few that kind of came out of sweep this week, some senior hires. Well, we had for LanguageWire, Klaus Skovrup joined. Actually, I don't know in what
CFO.
capacity he joined.
I think it was
there we go, CFO.
CFO, yes.
Yeah, there we go. He joined from an IT service provider and is based in Copenhagen. We also had news earlier in the week, or I think late last week, that Deluxe, so the media localization company, appointed Anna Lee as Chief Strategy Officer. So Anna had previously spent 12 years at Netflix, and she's going to be responsible for developing and executing strategic initiatives at the company. Then a new announcement
Hang
for
on, 12. So
yeah.
She spent 12 years at Netflix, and now she's going to Deluxe.
I believe so.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay. Good for her. 12 years.
I mean, 12 years is a long time, to be anywhere.
Yeah, it's so long. I mean, if she had even like okay. It's interesting that you'd move that way, right?
Well, I'm sure they made it an attractive offer.
They must have made it an extremely attractive offer. If you go after 12 years, you're probably a shareholder, and Netflix is up, I don't know, 300,000%. So that she even wants another corporate gig at all.
Maybe you can keep your shares, and they do some kind of buy. Well, like
you can. I'm sure you can. It's a public company, so you can keep your shares. I'm sure, but just generally that you're looking for another corporate gig after 12 years at that rocket ship Netflix. Total speculation. No. Interesting. Good for Deluxe. So,
it seems like a good hire.
Yeah.
And then TransPerfect. So they released an announcement today saying that they had hired Gillian Gittins, who is a former customer success manager at IQVIA. So the contract research organization. And she will be
the giant translation account, IQVIA. I don't know, what is it? The world's number 4 or 5? Not based on any research, but this must be one of the biggest translation accounts in the world. Yeah, IQVIA. Yeah.
So she's joining, or has joined, I think. Seems like maybe she joined a few months ago, but she has joined TransPerfect as the Director of eClinical Strategy and Solutions for Trial Interactive eClinical Platform. So that's again a big hire within the life sciences or clinical life sciences space.
Yeah. And then we got Roman Zelenka stepping down as CEO from Zelenka. So I think I don't think. I know. I saw his post on LinkedIn that there was some. It's very open. He said there was some disagreement with him and his father. Family company, didn't want to kind of let him lead the company the way he felt was best for the company. So interesting and open post on LinkedIn. Good luck to you, Roman, and whatever is next. So, now looking forward to speaking to Kåre Lindahl, the CEO of Venga Global. So let's be back in just a few seconds. Cheers.
See you soon.
And we're back. We're back with Kåre Lindahl, the CEO of Venga Global. Hello, Kåre.
Hi there. Nice to meet you.
Hi.
So, Kåre, where does this podcast find you today?
In London.
In London.
In London, yeah. Beautiful London, which is actually a little bit overcast, surprisingly.
It's very overcast from my window as well, but no rain, at least.
Well, who knows? But we met in San Francisco in 2019, right. And I think you're back and forth, or you pre-COVID maybe back and forth between California and London, or what do you call home these days?
Oh, everywhere, wherever I happened to be at the time. But to just give you some background,
Sure.
so I grew up in Sweden, hence the name, otherwise you wouldn't have a name like mine. Um, and then I left there in my early 20s to move to the UK, and I lived in London for about 10 years. And then an opportunity came up to move to the US. So then I moved to the US, and I was in the US for about 30 years. This is aging me now very rapidly. But then last summer we decided to move to London, so me and the family, because I wanted the kids to go to school in Europe, and language-wise, UK was easier than anywhere else. So physically, I live in London at the moment, but we still have an office in San Francisco. We still have, offices in different places. So nothing has changed for the company. It's just me, the weather, and all of that.
Wow. Okay. Yeah. Good journey there. So you're I introduced you as the CEO of Venga Global. I think we can also add there the former chairman of Gala, and we maybe touch upon that later on. So you just gave us a bit of a background to personally, right, and the different locations. But how did you get to start in this particular industry, the language industry? Tell us a bit about the origin story there.
Yes, big mistake. No, actually, I'm having a great time.
Good
Having
one.
a great time. So my background, when I moved to London, I started working for a Scandinavian software house, and I did that for a few years. And then when I moved to the US, I worked for large software companies like Oracle, still around, but PeopleSoft as well is another company. Um, and then when I moved to PeopleSoft, then Oracle actually ended up buying PeopleSoft. I'm not going to say they came after PeopleSoft just because I'd moved there, but who knows? Um, but by the time I got to roughly when Venga was started, I'd worked for Oracle and the other company for quite a while. And you get to a point in the big company where you feel like you're not really adding any value. It's not tangible anymore. You just go to internal meetings and spend more time fighting the other departments than you actually do promoting and working with the company. Um, so I was looking for something different, and then some people I used to work with started a software company. They got to a point where they needed help, and their company is Workday,
Oh, wow.
and they reached out to say, could you help us with translation? And I thought, sure. How difficult can that be? And then we started, or I started Venga.
Tell us about the name.
Yeah, the name. So I'm really, I shouldn't be working in languages. I barely speak English and Swedish. So I don't know languages as such, and I certainly don't know Spanish, where Venga comes from. But I decided when we started the company that I wanted a relatively short name. I wanted something not related to my name. And I wanted something preferably that I could just add a .com to, and then that would be the URL. We failed on the URL because venga.com was already taken.
Yeah, that's a $5 million, $10 million domain, maybe even more.
No, actually, I think it's much cheaper than that, but I'm
Really?
tight with money, so it's not going to happen.
Venga.com? Okay.
So that's why it's Venga Global now, because we could do that. And we have bought Venga.global. But the name was getting to a point where I had to sign a contract and I had to invoice. And I was just trying, and I was so many different names. It's like when you have your first child. So a friend of mine suggested Venga, and I liked the idea, and she explained kind of what it meant. So that's how it all happened.
That's a good one. Good one. It's also interesting that I think we have yet to have somebody on the podcast who's had basically studied translation and went into translation and then like had a deliberate career from A to Z. So many people just kind of like have a similar kind of origin story like you, where like they did something, somebody asked for language services, and then it kind of just went from there. But well, kudos to getting to that point. Just tell us a bit more about Venga, how large it is, where you're based, what's headquarters, where's some of the production, maybe some of the salespeople.
Sure. So we're still headquartered in the US, and that's through different companies, whatever. But we have an office in San Francisco. We then have offices in Argentina and in Europe, in the UK, Sweden, Ireland, and Spain. And then in Asia, we are in the Philippines and in Japan, in Tokyo.
Oh, wow. Okay. Yeah, we have a team in the Philippines as well. Great. Not much traveling there this year, of course. So, all mainly
No,
remote.
and actually, that's, on a personal level, that's actually been kind of nice. I traveled an awful lot in Q1 this year, but now I've been here, and my son was actually asking me the other day if I was going to start traveling again, or if I would, in a nice way. He was actually happy I was home, not the other way around.
Okay, that's good. That's a good sign.
Yeah, but it's interesting for us because there are about 100 of us in the company, and we work with primarily kind of larger high-tech companies, some really large, that with NDAs we can't even mention what they're called, and some smaller ones. But for our size to have that many different offices or people in different regions is, I think, a bit unusual. And part of that is because we had to service them. We had to have people not necessarily in that country, but we need to have someone in that region. That's why we have people in Asia and in North America, or North and South America, I suppose, and in Europe to support that.
Yeah, you have to be on site. I remember that from my LSP days as well. It just helps you service the customers. And speaking about scale and breadth, like what stands out to me when looking at Venga is also the breadth of the offering. I think, we have translation, localization, AI data services, globalization consulting, transcreation. Can we just talk a little bit about those? Like what made you kind of highlight those I would say four areas specifically, and like what are your thoughts on the trajectory of like each one of those, up to now, maybe going forward as well?
Take over the world is the idea. No, seriously though, I should stop making jokes.
Don't stop making jokes.
We like the jokes.
Please don't.
Okay, very good. But maybe before I do, so I worked for these big name software companies, but I was always on the kind of the global. I was a global champion. If you're trying to sell an HR system in Europe, why keep hopping on about 401k, which is the US pension plan system? No one is interested over here. So you're just wasting your money when you're translating that into different European languages. When you're training your customers, don't have them go through stuff that has no relevance whatsoever in the markets that you're training. We're just wasting money. And we did a lot of that at Oracle, and I'm sure many other companies are doing the same. So I'm not giving Oracle a bad name. I think it's a great company. But I came out of that big company, and then I started Venga, and then very quickly I realized I had absolutely no idea how to actually do the stuff that all these companies that have been helping us in the past were doing. It was a rude awakening when I went to Loc in Seattle and I met different people. And I remember one woman from Paris, or she was based in Paris, started asking me questions. And I was just like, I had no idea. I didn't know how to answer. I didn't know what to say to them. Some of them are still my friends, which is very nice. So very quickly, I realized I needed to find people who were clever and had done this before. And that's really how Venga was started. And we were lucky enough to have enough business, if you want, from our first client to be able to afford that so that we can kind of make it happen. And I was also lucky that I could hire in people on an hourly basis from my old days at PeopleSoft that knew how to get this done. So then if we come into the different markets, the first one that we went into was really tech. And that was also because I couldn't talk translation, which was obvious after that Seattle disaster. But I could talk about tech companies. I could talk about software. I knew how people were organized. I was very familiar with how these companies work. So when I was doing a little bit of selling, or at least branding ourselves, that's what I would do. I would talk about stuff that I could talk about. And that became our first and is still our largest market, if you want. So for them, what I think we do is, which perhaps is a little bit different from a medium-sized company is spend more time on integrations, API, and all that stuff. So that's what's happening on the translation side. We try to hook into their systems and eliminate as much as what we can of the manual steps. Then, and in no particular order, then we have the whole AI thing. And we, in some ways, stumbled into that several years ago. I think it was 2016, but it could have been 17. That we were asked by a large company if we could help them. They were going to train their MT systems at that point. And I don't like saying no, so we said yes. And then we tried to figure out how to do all of this. Fortunately enough, we were, I suppose, both lucky and clever enough so that we can actually carry it out. And then we started to realize that this is actually a bigger market than perhaps we realized before. And I think, I don't know, if you go off a little bit outside ourselves, I think when we're working with the clients at the moment, and we're working with 3 of the 6 large ones, if you talk about data, it seems, you see all the people like Appen, Lionbridge, Moravia, TransPerfect, we localize. But you also see 1 or 2 medium-sized companies, and then you see really tiny companies, 1-2 people companies, led by data scientists that are solving a specific problem for one of them. And I think and this is my view of life, what seems to be happening is that many of the larger solutions are kind of based on really large crowds. And the quality isn't always there, and that seems to be the problem. That some of the clients are experiencing that they can't. It's not high quality enough to be able to train their engines, which is why they want the help. And I think that's what we've done with that. Being a medium-sized player is spending as much time as we can on building automation, building tools that enable us to cut out the manual processes. And then be very careful about who we call it a supervised or a managed crowd, the people that we work with. And that's what we've been doing to be more successful.
So that's an interesting observation, I suppose, that you have on the one hand these very large companies who are used to managing huge crowds in this AI sort of data space, and then there's also room for these smaller players. How do you see that evolving if you think about the dynamic of humans and automation?
Well, there's still humans involved in this, and I'm certainly not a data scientist. We have a group in the company that deal with this, and they would talk more intelligently about this. But you still need the humans to be able to train the engines or train the AI, if you want. And the other part of this is that we make this much. And the bigger players are making this much, and I'm completely aware of that. But we've been able to compete and succeed in some areas where we can solve a specific problem for them. Now we're trying to ramp up so we can become bigger as well.
But do you think? Sorry.
No, you can.
No, sorry to cut you off there. I was just thinking. Is it because you had established relationships with them on the translation side before, and they kind of like how to manage their procurement, and then you took on that additional service? Or do you think that's actually an opportunity because that market seems to be growing for like other LSPs as well to actually go in there and compete? Is that a good service to get into, or like do you have to have really
and we didn't have relationships, so we got in.
Okay.
Now the first one we were lucky. We knew someone who knew someone and they contacted us, and it was sheer luck. But for the other 2, for example, we got in because we could show them what we could do. And it's like you walk through a different door when you talk about data AI than when you talk about localization. Now, Would you do this if you're an LSP somewhere and you think, well, let's see what we can do in the data world? I think you can, but I think you need to be, first of all, it's really fast changing. So the solutions we saw last year, we can't sell anymore because now they want something different. So it's not like you can build up this thing and then you're going to run this for 10 years. It is constantly changing, and it seems to be they're roughly changing on a similar speed. It's like they all are working on similar things. So it's very fast changing. And then you do need technology. Like I talked about, it's not just me trying to make Venga look really fancy, that we have all this technology and all that. We've built this, and you build it in weeks rather than years. And you solve a specific problem. So it might not be repeatable that you can use it later, but you need to have people on hand inside your company, both on the data science side and also on the kind of solutions architects, and then the actual developers who can write the programs. Because if you don't solve, like if you have a massive voice file, an hour's worth of recording, and then you have many of those, you have thousands of those and stuff like that. You can't manually go in and cut these and try to hit exactly when it ends. You need to automate that. Not only does it cost a lot of money, but if you have cheap resources, you could use that. But they're going to make mistakes. We all make mistakes manually. So you need to automate these different things. Otherwise, you can never make any money out of it because the margins are much lower. So I think if you don't have that, if you don't have the team inside, if you don't have the developers, then don't.
But
Wait
what did you do? Can
Yeah.
I just ask, what did you do? Because you said day one, somebody contacted you and you'd never done it before. So how do you, day one, if you've not done this before, how do you go about delivering that solution?
So it was a much smaller project than subsequent projects, like hundreds of thousands instead of millions in dollars worth. And I think I'm biased, but I think I've hired in some really smart people, and they came up with a solution that apparently none of the other companies that they've talked to came up with, and that's how it worked.
Just one more on the services side, and then we're moving on to, I guess, M&A, where I really want to hear your thoughts. But you also do globalization consulting.
Yes.
I find this interesting as a service, right? I mean, you kind of do. I've seen many LSPs that try to package the consulting component of their offering and then sell it, but it's usually the clients would be like, well, you're getting this $500,000 contract or $2 million contract. Obviously, you're going to have to consult me, right? That's part of like the services. So how do you manage to package this and sell it as kind of a standalone thing to a client? And is it usually tied to a service or not?
Well, in one word, poorly. That's how we managed to package it. So I think we could do more, but I with the tech companies, and maybe I'm biased there as well. I think a lot of them have this not invented here syndrome. So you don't want to go out and get that consulting help. I think the other part is that many companies still view translation as a commodity. Now, you're willing to pay more for a better commodity, but if you're also going to pay for consulting, then what is the team that we've hired in to manage all of this? What are they going to do? I think if you need to build an integration which is really not standard but very bespoke, I think companies are willing to pay for that. We can have our tech guys work with their tech guys and all that. I think if you have, which we have some of the companies that are kind of Series D, maybe before IPO, they really have no one. They're willing to pay for us to kind of run that group for them. But then very quickly we hire someone. We probably help them hire that. We do a bit of training, and then they take off on their own. So it's not a big part of our revenue. It's a stopgap, but I think it's something that is useful to have for those situations.
Yeah, so let's switch to talk a bit about mergers and acquisitions now. And
Yes.
yes, what is your view? I'm interested to hear on sort of the large deals that have happened in the past few months from your perspective for your business, and then what impact for the wider industry as well.
Well, I'm glad that they're interested, and I'm talking about the financial people. Um, a few years ago, we used to say that, you know, when all the PE companies figure out what translation industry is actually all about, they'll all walk away and never come back. But they're still here, so we're happy. We're happy. But if you look at the most recent one, I think that would create like $1 billion company. It's still only 2-3%, depending on who you believe, of the market. So I would have thought that won't necessarily change anything right now. I think and the next one down is then, you know, smaller than that. I think until you have, you know, really large companies that are taking care of a huge part of the business, I think that will change the landscape for the rest of us. But it could actually be to the better in some ways. They might force certain type of pricing structures that it's difficult to do now when it's so fragmented. So I think for us, we're still in the near future, we're still looking to acquire. And then, God, I hope at some point we can get, or I can get out and Venga can continue to take over the world and all that. But I'm not sure I'm going to be around for taking over the world. So I think, therefore, it's encouraging to see that there's interest in the market.
And you did your own acquisition. I know you mentioned possibly more to come, but you acquired a company a couple of years ago called Translators International. How did that go? How did you deal with the integration?
So first of all, before I tell you the story, I'll say it's been a great addition, you know, to the company as a whole. The team is great. The clients are still there, and we're servicing them. And we added on a little bit more hardware or tangible industries, if you want, not just software. So that's all great. But I think we went through, I don't know what it's called in psychology, isn't it? It's like when you buy a car, as soon as you drive out, you think, oh, what did I do? Why did I buy this car?
Buyer's remorse.
Buyer's remorse, and also seller's remorse. You know,
okay.
the owner of the company didn't stay; he left immediately, but the rest of the staff remained. And I think all of us, in different degrees, actually went through. I think we started off actually with champagne, you know, signed contract. We had champagne in the office, so jubilation and everything. Then we got into the confusion phase, and then suspicion. Can it really be that they're planning to do this on both sides? And then you have anger, and then you have outright hostilities, and then you have resignation, where it's, okay, fine, whatever, I don't care anymore. And then some interest started to peak, and then we actually went all the way over to creating that team that we'd hoped to have on day one. So for us, I think we had a very similar culture. I think we had smart people in both sides. They had and we have. We kind of, I think if you hire smart people, you need to give them freedom to act. Otherwise, what's the point? If you have machines, then that's a different story. So culture-wise, I think we were very similar. What I had not thought about was that they were office-based, and we are really virtual. Even if we have offices, we have many offices. So all the time when I've been working at Oracle, PeopleSoft, and all these companies before, even the Swedish software company, I've never had my boss in the same building, or the people reporting to me in the same building. They've been in different countries and all that. And that was a big difference. In their case, they had an office. You arrive, you work, and then you lock the door and you go home. Changing that with new laptops, changing that with the use of Zoom, and then I think it was more Skype and Slack and all these different things. Took time before that was something that they could get used to. I think you have your people on your team are in Argentina and in North America and somewhere in Europe, and you need to operate and work with them differently than if they sit on the decks at a desk next to you.
Yeah.
So I think that was a big thing that we did wrong.
That we did wrong. Yeah, but on the tech side, like how tricky was it to integrate, TMSs, CAT tools, I don't know, ERPs, all of that? Because many companies they merge kind of on paper, but behind the scenes, it's very, very tough to kind of be merge into a unified platform. Was that something that you struggled with as well, or?
No, it was very easy. I didn't have to do anything. I just asked some smart people to do it.
That's
So
a good one.
they were in, and I'm not advertising any, but they were in one of the project management systems or whatever you want to call it, the Plunets, the XTRF and all that, and we were in the other. So there was some pain in there, and you think you can merge all the information, but stuff happens, and then suddenly you have to be in there keying in stuff to fix it. Also the financial system, I think, was also a change, because we actually run all of our financial control from the UK for all the different companies, and that's also different when you used to have it run a certain way, and now suddenly it's going to be centralized. But that was okay. I think you can explain that, and it's going to be painful, but it's not. I think the confusion and the anger and all of that is something that shouldn't be underestimated. I thought we did a lot of communication, but I think we could have done more. And I think going forward, that's what we're going to do. And I think I also underestimate. I look at that much more now when we look at companies. Is this a traditional office-based company or isn't it? How many clients do they have? We have maybe 100 clients. And certainly of the ones that generate most of revenue is much smaller. But then you have companies that have 5,000 clients. They operate in a very different way than we do. Would it be possible to integrate or not?
Very interesting. Now you're saying maybe the next deal, more careful, etc. In terms of the financing options for wanting to grow, private equity has been a huge, I guess, boon for this industry, right? I mean, you could argue what's happening in the boardroom, etc. But generally, on the financing side, is most of the deal flow in this industry is private equity financed. Why do you think there's not more IPOs? I asked Phil Shaw in a recent interview with us, like when they announced results, the same thing, and he says, "Well, it's because there's so much PE money." Like, what are your thoughts? Like, why? Like, how to finance growth in the most optimal way, and then like, why isn't anybody going IPO in this industry? Like, except in Australia, which is a random factoid.
I know. So between Oracle and PeopleSoft, all of that, I was the CEO of a nanotechnology company, which was a public company for like 2 years. And their revenue certainly is lower than what we have. And their market cap at the moment, because it goes ups and down and all that, is lower than what we have. So they're in one of those European, I don't know what you call it, but not the traditional markets, but the smaller markets.
Yeah, the alternative, or yeah, one of those. Yeah.
So it's certainly be something I've been thinking about. I thought that would be a great idea. And every time I do, the people who advise me, I have an advisory board with bankers and lawyers and stuff like that are really clever. And they say, no, it's too painful. You have the quarterly reports and you have a type of scrutiny, and the overhead that you add to a business to just be able to go public is too much. The other one, I think, is if you look at how much turnover you have for these companies. Let's say that you want to exit, you want to get out. There's not that much money that is going around. So, and if you start selling on a heavy, selling a lot, then the share price is just going to tank. So if you're thinking of a financial event as a beginning of an exit, then I think private equity is a better one as well. But it is tricky. So when we started up, we had we needed to borrow money because we were paying our translators on the dot, and we gave them fairly good rates because without them we're nothing. So but we were paid by our clients. Some of them had 60 days, some of them had 45 working days, whatever. So as we grew, we had that gap. We needed to finance that, and the only way I could do that was because I have a house in San Francisco, and the house prices went up, so I could borrow on that. But that's a tricky part. No one will lend you money for a service company. You have nothing, and they look at all you're saying. This looks very interesting. Why don't you come back next year? Go back next year. Go. This looks very interesting, but they never actually lend you any money.
That's quite the entrepreneurial move. You're using your house to as working capital collateral for growing the business.
It's true. On the other hand, I was never risking anything unless this
Sure.
company went bust, and we never got our money. So it's not like I borrow money to build a fancy translation tool or something. But I think that's true for most companies. That's how you do it. I think now we've looked into not only private equity but also debt equity as a potential for raising money. And then we talked to not the high street banks, but like the B2B, the more business banks.
Merchant bank, IBs. Yeah.
Well, I don't know. They're primarily in
like
the US.
Business growth and stuff, or
Yeah, and we can borrow this much, kind of based on accounts receivable, and you can do stuff, but it does limit what you can do when it comes to a really big merger or a big acquisition. And I think that's where PE potentially is the easiest route.
So I think one of the things that's surprised me, I suppose, is that even now, sort of however many months we are into COVID, that M&A and funding are still continuing. Sure, there was a little bit of a hiatus, but I mean, we saw quite a quick resumption of M&A activity. I mean, COVID obviously did have an impact then on sort of the investment, but what about the impact of COVID, not necessarily, financially or in terms of investment, but what other impacts have you seen in your business, and what other impacts do you see of COVID in the industry?
Well, I think we've all seen the reports that come back, where people report. I think for us, we've had a mixed bag. We certainly see many companies that have actually increased their spending. So financially, it hasn't really hit us so much. Of course, if you do a lot of work for the travel industry, if you do a lot of work for the fashion industry, you can be more impacted and stuff. But I think for us, the two big things: one, the travel, we don't, and it's been interesting that we've actually been able to get some really good leads, and we've signed some or partnered with new customers. And I didn't think that would happen. When we were all panicking in March and everything, I was wondering what would happen. But it's been surprisingly effective. We've run webinars. Who hasn't? Why would anyone come to our webinars? But we've had good people come into our webinars, and we've been careful about content and all that, so you're not too wishy-washy, but actually give substance and all that. But still, there's so many of them around. You wonder why they come. And we've also been at quite a few of the virtual conferences and stuff, and had some good conversations with people. So that's interesting. I assume that we will still go back to traveling and going to events and all that, but I think not just us, everyone, I think, will realize that no, actually, you can do a combination of live and virtual. You've been to some of these as well, where you sit down and you chat with people at the table. Surprisingly nice. Actually,
Yeah.
had some good conversations with people. So I think those are the ones that that we're going to evaluate and see what happens. From a working perspective, we were already working like this anyway. We were all on Zoom, we were all on Slack, is what we use for our collaboration, for quick messaging and stuff. But we are also constantly encouraging people to, even if you just want to ask a quick question, turn on the camera, do a Zoom call so you see each other. And you need to do that all the time, because that's how you retain that relationship and all that.
Yeah.
So when you're saying like, okay, so online conferences, and then like depending on the tool, you know, you can have some of those kind of salesy encounters, but like just pure lead gen, going out doing the selling, do you feel your salespeople, do you feel they're as efficient? I mean, they can't meet anymore. I mean, for me, the golden rule previously when I managed sales teams, like, hey man, you need to meet 2 or 3 people a day, otherwise like you're not really doing like. So what's the metric now? You need to send 50 LinkedIn invites and have 20 Zoom calls, or like how do you manage
you
that?
need to have those photographs, and then you just blackmail it. It's like a charm. No, seriously. And we do go out both to see. It's more with the existing clients that you meet and all that. But many of these companies we work with are not that keen on having us come out, or even before COVID, you'd have a Zoom meeting like this. It's just too much overhead to have someone come and visit and set up a conference room and all these different things. We try, and we have been out to see potential clients. But for us, I think the conferences that we go to, and I'm not talking Local or Gala or anything, those are the ones that we really have been very successful at and have not been able to do right now. So we're hoping for that to start again.
So mentioning Gala, tell us a bit about that. So you were chairman, you were like elected chairman of Gala in 2019, and then you handed over.
Yeah,
how does it work?
Yeah, it was a coup.
It was a coup.
No,
All right.
the way I see this is that we've been members of Gala for a long time, and we are members of different organizations as well. I like Gala. I think Gala has the potential at really becoming the global association for both clients and companies. And I think we need that to build the industry. There are many other companies, and like yourself, for example, that are filling a really good space, and you need it for that. You certainly get the information out about our industry, and with all the PE companies, I always plug Slator. They need to look at you and see what's happening. But if you look at Gala, it's a non-profit, and I think it's a great place to come together. So anyway, we're members since early on, and then different members decide to run for the board, and then people get elected to be on the board, and you can be there for 2 years, and you can run for a re-election, and then maximum is 4 years. But when you leave, you then become a member again. And many people who are on the board are members, and you still have as much communication and interaction with them. So it's, I think the board, at least I've been there 3 years now, really consist of people that are trying to think of how they can make Gala a little bit better. How can they support the staff that we have to make Gala just a little bit better as an association? And being the chairman or not chairman really has no impact. It just means that you have to run the board meetings. The best one is to be the vice chairman, because then you do nothing. you just hope that the chairman is going to be there, and you have to run the meeting. But it's a very collaborative environment. But I really like that, and I try to encourage people from different parts of Gala to then run for the board, because we need that. We need the input from different people, so that we listen to all the different members.
Yeah. All right, let's look a little bit into the future, crystal ball. Just couple of things I would like to look at. Like, just generally business. Where do you see this going? I know we don't know, but still, like, assuming, some normalization towards like springtime. That's number one, kind of super macro. And number two, more on the MT side. We haven't really touched on the MT, but like it's getting better and better. Like, I'm not seeing any major breakthroughs anymore, but like how do you integrate it? How do you work with it? Where do you see this going in the next 2 to 3 years?
Okay, easy. So, um, like I said, no one really knows because now many people are saying, well, the end of 2021, we'll have a vaccine out and it will really be back to normal and all that. But I think for us, we started the budgeting process for next year. On the revenue side, it looks good. We don't see any major changes, so it's almost business as usual. And then you throw in MT to that, like you did in your question. And we use MT for some clients and some processes. It's certainly not used everywhere. It depends on the type of work that we're doing, if it makes sense or it doesn't make sense. But if you then take it a longer view, you think what's going to happen in many years. My personal view is that I'm assuming that all the structured content is going to go into MT. So if you talk about user assistance, you talk about support, knowledge bases, you talk about all that stuff. I used to say stuff that the customers don't look at until they've signed anyway. So who cares? Then you will empty that, and I think people will accept that it's not going to be completely exact. They'll know that it is a machine that has translated all of that. I think we got to that point. Then I think when you come to emotional content, brand content, I think that's where we need to change. And I don't think transcreation is the only answer to that. I think you need to build virtual teams of freelance copywriters that work with you and work with the client for a long time to build that. Because that's you've seen the Amazon Swedish thing.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, we didn't talk about this before.
we were gonna talk about that earlier, but
So I
give us
don't.
the lowdown.
So
How
yesterday
bad is it?
you dropped the bomb.
It's half term here. So the kids are off school. So yesterday actually we had almost a full day out. And I happened to look at the phone when a friend of mine sent over a message, and I just couldn't stop laughing. I don't use language like that, and I certainly don't want my kids to use it. I don't mind if they use it when I don't hear it, but I don't want them to use language like that. I think it's pretty bad, and you know how long it takes to get rid of stuff like this. All the Nova examples and all the stuff that we hear about at every conference. And they're just moving in, and there are lots of people who are suspicious of buying online still in Sweden. Yeah.
I mean, yeah, for those who don't know what we're talking about, just Google Amazon and translation fail and you'll find it out.
Swedish, yeah.
Swedish, that's right.
Fail.
So I love the one with the picture, the card you can send to your friends.
Was that was the one on Twitter, I think? Or...
Yeah, possibly. Yeah. I got it from one of the newspapers in Sweden. So it was all over all the newspapers in Sweden.
Yeah.
And people still read newspapers and stuff like that. So that's important stuff. The fine print that is on, you're on Amazon and you click on something about shipping, fine print or whatever. No one is going to care about that. If there is an error, then we fix it. But this, the brand and what's in your face, that's really important. And I think that's where you need to find ways of combined post editing if you are using MT, which you probably would with that amount of content. But also having brand ambassadors, and they don't all need to be on payroll, they can be hired in, etc. But I think for us as translation companies, that's why we have transcreation as one of our services. That's why we work with freelancers, copywriters, instead of just translators. But it's finding that balance, because you can't do all marketing with freelancers, then it's too expensive. So you need to do some, perhaps regular or MT, some with transcription, and then some with freelancer copywriters, I think.
Yeah, that's it's good. We shouldn't end on the Amazon note.
No.
I'll
end on a different one, if I may.
Yeah,
So
please.
one thing that I think is
maybe
important,
not the worst note to end. Sorry.
No, but one thing that I think is important is what we do to the world. So global warming and all this stuff. A friend of mine is heavily involved in biogas and how we can use our compost. Ocado, which is a food delivery service in the UK, apparently now switching their cars over to or trucks that are not emitting stuff. We fly a lot. So how do you? So all the restaurants in New York, for example, give their food to this company that produces biogas that they can then fill up at Newark and LaGuardia. So Norwegian, which is one of these airlines, they apparently fill up in the US, because then they don't pollute when they go back and forth. I think diversity is another really important, or actually I like the word of inclusion more than diversity. And we work in so many different cultures that we actually have an opportunity as a business to highlight this and to promote diversity. Women in Localization, another great group that are doing fantastic work. So there are many different initiatives that I think that's something for the future. I think we need to do more of that as an industry and also as companies. And even if it seems minute what you do, I think it can have an impact.
That is a fantastic way to end it. Thank you for that.
Thanks,
and yes, and thanks so much for taking the time to do this today. Really appreciate it. This was very interesting.
Likewise. Very nice to chat.
Thanks a lot.
All right. Let's catch up in real life at some point.
Sounds good.
All right. Take care. Bye.